Good evening and welcome. Tonight's video is designed for rest, not focus. In this long, calm journey, you will hear hundreds of gentle facts from Greek mythology about gods, heroes, creatures, and forgotten legends. You don't need to remember anything. You don't need to follow every detail. Let the words drift past you, like a quiet whisper from the ancient world. Whether you're listening from your bed, from another room, or somewhere far away, you are welcome here. Slow your breathing, relax your body, and allow sleep to come naturally. Zeus was not immune to fear. Despite ruling Olympus, he constantly worried about being overthrown by his own children, repeating the same cycle that had defined divine history before him. Zeus did not control fate. Even as king of the gods, he could not change what the fates decided. At best, he could delay outcomes, never erase them. Hera was not only a goddess of marriage, but also a guardian of lawful order. Her punishments focused on betrayal rather than love itself. Hera rarely punished Zeus directly. Instead, she targeted those involved in his affairs, revealing the limits of confronting power even among gods. Poseidon ruled more than the sea. He was also the god of earthquakes, owning the title Earthshaker. Poseidon's moods were believed to directly affect the oceans. Calm seas meant favor, while storms signaled divine anger. Athena was one of the few Olympians immune to emotional manipulation. Her decisions followed logic, rather than desire or revenge. Athena's wisdom did not make her merciful. Many of her punishments were permanent and designed to preserve balance, not comfort. Apollo represented both healing and disease. The same god who cured illness could also bring plagues. Apollo's prophecies were always true, but rarely clear. Their ambiguity forced mortals to take responsibility for interpretation. Artemis protected wildlife and young life, yet punished intrusion into her sacred spaces without hesitation. For Artemis, intention mattered less than boundaries. Simply crossing a limit could trigger punishment. Ares was disliked even by other gods. His love of chaos made him unreliable. Ares represented violence without purpose. Unlike Athena, he cared little about outcome or justice. Aphrodite could influence gods as easily as mortals. Desire ignored rank and authority. Love in Greek mythology was often destructive. Aphrodite's influence regularly caused wars and disasters. Hephaestus was physically imperfect, but intellectually superior to most gods. Hephaestus built divine weapons, traps, and armor, proving intelligence could outweigh physical power. Hermes was the protector of travelers, thieves, merchants, and messengers at the same time. Hermes represented transition. He moved freely between worlds, carrying messages, souls, and secrets. Demeter controlled agriculture, making her essential to human survival. When Demeter grieved, crops failed. Famine was seen as divine sorrow made physical. Hestia appeared rarely in myths, yet received daily worship in Greek homes. Hestia symbolized stability. Her power was quiet, but constant. The Olympian gods were never moral ideals. Greek myths presented them as flawed forces, not perfect beings. Gods could be injured, humiliated, and deceived. Immortality did not equal invincibility. Divine power depended partly on recognition. Worship sustained relevance. Gods competed for influence among mortals just as much as among themselves. Different Greek regions told conflicting myths without seeing them as contradictions. Greek mythology had no single official version. Stories evolved through retelling. Olympian rule was based on balance, not harmony. Conflict maintained order. Olympus functioned less like a family and more like a political system. Chaos was not disorder in the modern sense. It represented a vast emptiness from which everything else emerged. Before the Olympians existed, reality was ruled by primordial forces rather than personalities. Gaia was both the earth itself and a conscious being. She could feel pain when the land was harmed. Gaia repeatedly turned against her own children when they threatened balance, showing that creation did not guarantee loyalty. Uranus feared his offspring and imprisoned them inside the earth, triggering the first cosmic rebellion. The overthrow of Uranus established a pattern where generations of gods replaced one another through conflict. Cronus ruled during the Golden Age, yet became a tyrant, driven by fear of prophecy. Cronus swallowed his children not out of cruelty, but panic. Fear shaped divine violence. Rhea saved Zeus by deceiving Cronus, proving that intelligence, not strength, broke tyranny. The Titans were not inherently evil. Many represented natural cycles like time, memory, and law. Atlas did not hold the earth, but the sky, preventing it from crushing the world. Atlas's punishment symbolized endurance rather than cruelty. Prometheus sided with humanity against Zeus, redefining rebellion as compassion. Prometheus's punishment lasted eternity, showing that kindness toward mortals carried extreme risk. Epimetheus represented hindsight, always understanding consequences too late. The contrast between Prometheus and Epimetheus symbolized foresight versus regret. Nyx was so powerful that even Zeus feared her. Nyx embodied night as a force older than law and kingship. Erebus represented deep darkness beneath the world, separate from night itself. Darkness in Greek myth was layered, not singular. Eros existed before Aphrodite and symbolized attraction as a cosmic force, not romance. Without Eros, creation could not combine or progress. Ananke represented necessity, a force even gods could not resist. Fate in Greek mythology was stronger than divine will. Nemesis punished imbalance rather than crime, restoring proportion rather than justice. Excess, not evil, triggered Nemesis's intervention. Hypnos could put even Zeus to sleep. Sleep was considered more powerful than violence. Thanatos represented peaceful death, not destruction. Death itself was not always feared. Disorder was. Moirai determined lifespans of gods and mortals alike. Even Zeus could not alter the thread once it was cut. Hecate existed across multiple realms, including earth, sea, and underworld. Hecate retained power under every divine regime, showing adaptability ensured survival. Many minor gods governed specific moments, not places, such as opportunity, persuasion, or fear. Greek mythology treated abstract experiences as divine forces. Some gods faded simply because people stopped invoking them. Divinity depended on relevance. Not all gods lived on Olympus. Power was distributed, not centralized. The Olympians ruled politically, not absolutely. Older gods often represented inevitability, while Olympians represented control. Greek myth preserved tension between chaos and order rather than resolving it. Many Greek myths begin with a prophecy, not an action. Fate usually appeared before choice. Prophecies in Greek mythology were not warnings. They were descriptions of what would happen. Attempts to escape fate almost always caused it to occur. Moirai controlled destiny, not the Olympian gods. The Moirai were older than Zeus and operated outside his authority. Fate in Greek myth was fixed, but the path toward it was flexible. Zeus knew many prophecies about his downfall, yet could not erase them. Zeus swallowed Metis to avoid a prophecy, but this action directly caused Athena's birth. Divine intelligence could delay fate, but never cancel it. Cronus tried to avoid prophecy by swallowing his children. Cronus's actions ensured that the prophecy would come true through rebellion. Fear of fate often made gods more cruel than fate itself. Oedipus fulfilled a prophecy precisely by trying to escape it. His parents' attempt to prevent destiny set every event in motion. Greek myths treated fate as impersonal, not malicious. Apollo delivered prophecies, but did not control their outcomes. Oracles spoke truth without explanation. Misinterpretation, not falsehood, caused tragedy. Perseus was born because a prophecy frightened his grandfather. Imprisonment meant to prevent fate, created opportunity for it. Heracles was fated to suffer, despite divine parentage. Being a son of Zeus did not protect him from destiny. Heroes often experienced harsher fates than ordinary mortals. Achilles was given a choice between a long life and lasting glory. Fate sometimes offered options, not escape. Achilles' weakness symbolized that no destiny was without cost. Paris was abandoned at birth because of a prophecy. Survival ensured the prophecy's fulfillment. Greek myths repeatedly warned against acting out of fear of the future. Hera often acted to protect destiny rather than disrupt it. Gods sometimes enforced fate, even when it caused suffering. Themis represented divine law aligned with fate. Justice and destiny were interconnected. Prophecy did not remove responsibility from individuals. Choices still mattered, even when outcomes were fixed. Greek mythology suggested that dignity came from how fate was faced. Acceptance was often portrayed as wisdom. Resistance created tragedy. Fate in Greek myth was not punishment. It was structure. Many monsters in Greek mythology were not born evil. They became monsters as a result of punishment, transformation, or divine neglect, rather than inherent malice. Medusa was not always a monster. In several versions of the myth, she was once human, transformed after violating divine boundaries, turning her gaze into a permanent defense. The Gorgons were feared not only for their appearance, but because they represented irreversible consequence. Once seen, there was no negotiation, no escape. Minotaur was the result of divine punishment imposed on an entire kingdom rather than a single individual. His existence symbolized the cost of defying the gods. Through arrogance, the labyrinth was built not to trap intruders, but to contain shame. Monsters were often hidden rather than destroyed. Cerberus was not evil or aggressive by nature. His role was purely functional, to prevent the dead from leaving and the living from entering the underworld. Cerberus represented order at the boundary between life and death, not cruelty. Hydra grew stronger when attacked improperly. Each severed head multiplied, symbolizing problems that worsen when confronted without strategy. The Hydra was not meant to be defeated by strength alone. Fire and coordination were required, reinforcing Athena's philosophy of intelligence over force. Chimera combined multiple animals into a single body, representing disorder and unnatural imbalance. Hybrid creatures often symbolized violations of natural boundaries. rather than simple terror. Sphinx did not attack blindly. She tested intelligence, killing only those who failed to understand. In Greek myth, ignorance was often more dangerous than weakness. Sirens did not lure sailors through beauty alone. Their songs promised knowledge, not pleasure. The danger of the sirens lay in curiosity without restraint. Cyclopes were skilled craftsmen before they were portrayed as brutes. Some forged Zeus's thunderbolts. Monsters were often reinterpreted over time as societies changed. Scylla was once a nymph, transformed through jealousy and divine rivalry. Her punishment reflected how innocent figures could become collateral damage in conflicts between gods. Charybdis represented unavoidable danger rather than malice. She symbolized natural disasters that could not be reasoned with, only navigated. Typhon was the most dangerous enemy the Olympians ever faced. His defeat established Zeus's rule permanently, showing that monsters could represent existential threats, not just obstacles. Many monsters guarded thresholds, such as caves, seas, or borders. They existed where worlds overlapped. Greek monsters often punished excess curiosity. Entering forbidden space usually triggered transformation or death. Unlike later fantasy, monsters in Greek myth were rarely random. They existed for a reason. Sometimes that reason was balance. Sometimes it was warning. Sometimes it was memory. The Greek underworld was not a place of punishment by default. It was a structured realm designed to separate the living from the dead and maintain cosmic order rather than inflict suffering. Hades was not a god of death, but a god of the dead. He did not cause death and rarely left his realm, acting more as an administrator than a judge. Hades was one of the few gods who never sought power through rebellion or deception. His authority was stable because it was accepted rather than enforced. Persephone ruled the underworld alongside Hades, not beneath him. Over time, she became a figure of balance between life and death rather than a passive captive. Persephone's seasonal return symbolized not resurrection, but temporary renewal. Death in Greek myth was a pause, not an erasure. Thanatos represented peaceful death, separate from violence or suffering. He was calm, silent, and rarely resisted. Violent death belonged to other forces. Thanatos governed the moment of transition itself. Charon did not judge souls. He simply transported them across the river separating life from death. Without proper burial rites, souls were left wandering, unable to cross. This made funerals a moral duty rather than a social custom. Styx was not just a river, but a sacred boundary. Oaths sworn upon it were binding even for gods. Breaking a Styx oath resulted in divine punishment, showing that law existed above personal power. Asphodel meadows housed ordinary souls who lived neither heroically nor wickedly. Most humans were believed to end up here, reflecting a realistic view of moral life rather than extremes. Elysian fields were reserved for heroes, demigods, and those favored by the gods. Elysium was not an eternal reward for virtue alone, but for exceptional impact or divine connection. Tartarus was deeper than the underworld itself and functioned as a cosmic prison. It housed threats to existence rather than ordinary sinners, including defeated titans and primordial forces. Punishments in Tartarus were symbolic. Each torment reflected the crime committed, reinforcing consequence rather than cruelty. Lethe erased memory rather than identity. Forgetting life was seen as necessary to prevent endless longing and suffering. The underworld was not a place of judgment for most souls. Judgment applied only when balance had been severely disrupted. Death in Greek mythology did not promise justice. It promised separation. Fear of death came not from pain, but from loss of identity and memory. Immortality was feared as much as desired. Many nymphs warned that living forever meant witnessing endless loss. The underworld preserved structure rather than hope. Its purpose was containment, not redemption. Greek mythology treated death as inevitable, not evil. Acceptance, not defiance, was considered wisdom. Greek heroes were not admired for moral perfection. They were remembered because they endured suffering, made difficult choices, and lived with the consequences of those choices rather than escaping them. Heracles was celebrated for strength, yet most of his story focused on punishment and atonement. His famous labors were not quests for glory, but forced acts of correction after losing control. Heracles' strength never protected him from grief. The myths emphasize that power without emotional balance led to tragedy rather than fulfillment. Achilles was nearly invincible, yet fully aware of his short lifespan. His greatest conflict was not physical danger, but the knowledge that every choice reduced his remaining time. Achilles' rage defined his legacy as much as his skill. Greek myth treated uncontrolled anger as a weakness, even in the greatest warrior. Odysseus survived not through strength, but adaptability. His intelligence saved him repeatedly, yet his pride prolonged his suffering. Odysseus' journey home lasted 10 years because wisdom without restraint became arrogance. Greek myths often punished cleverness when it turned into self-importance. Perseus succeeded because he followed instructions precisely. Divine gifts mattered less than his ability to use them correctly. Perseus represents the ideal balance between obedience and initiative. He acted independently, but never ignored guidance. Theseus was praised as a civilizing hero, yet many of his actions caused long-term harm. His abandonment of Ariadne revealed how heroism often benefited cities more than individuals. Greek myth allowed heroes to be admirable and cruel at the same time. Jason achieved success only through others, particularly Medea. Once his goal was reached, his ingratitude destroyed everything he gained. Jason's story warned that ambition without loyalty led to isolation and ruin. Medea was both helper and destroyer. Greek myth portrayed her as intelligent, betrayed, and dangerous when stripped of protection. She challenged the idea that heroes were the only agents of action. Oedipus was intelligent and just, yet doomed by circumstances beyond his control. His tragedy lay not in ignorance, but in discovering the truth. Knowledge in Greek myth often carried unbearable cost. Heroes rarely lived peacefully after success. Survival did not guarantee happiness. Most heroic stories ended in exile, madness, or early death. Divine favor was temporary. Gods supported heroes only as long as they remained useful. Once balance shifted, protection vanished. Greek heroes were remembered not because they won, but because they endured. Their suffering made them meaningful. Failure did not erase heroism. It defined it. Heroes were not role models. They were warnings. Greek mythology suggested that greatness demanded sacrifice beyond fairness. Those who sought glory accepted loss in advance. Anti-heroes existed because Greek myth accepted contradiction. A person could save a city and destroy a family in the same lifetime. Its tension made heroic stories last. They reflected life rather than ideals. Greek heroes were human first. That was their power. Greek religion was practiced daily, not occasionally. Worship was woven into routine life through meals, travel, agriculture, and family events, rather than reserved only for temples or festivals. Ancient Greeks did not worship to feel close to the gods. They worshiped to maintain balance and avoid disruption, believing neglect was more dangerous than disbelief. Zeus was honored through oaths and public rituals, especially those connected to justice and authority. Breaking a sworn oath was considered an offense against cosmic order, not just society. Sacrifice was not meant to impress the gods. It was a symbolic exchange meant to acknowledge hierarchy and remind mortals of their place within it. Animals offered in sacrifice were carefully chosen. Imperfect offerings were believed to anger the gods rather than appease them. Hestia was honored in every home through the hearth fire, daily offerings to her mattered more than grand ceremonies. The hearth symbolized continuity. As long as the fire burned, the household remained protected and whole. Hermes received offerings at crossroads, doorways, and boundaries. He governed transitions rather than destinations. Travelers prayed to Hermes, not for speed, but for safe passage between places. Apollo was worshipped for clarity and purification. His rituals often involved cleansing rather than reward. Plague, prophecy, and healing were connected because all required correction rather than force. Demeter was honored through agricultural festivals tied to planting and harvest cycles. Her worship reflected dependence on nature rather than domination of it. Temples were not gathering halls. Most worship occurred outside, under open sky. The gods were believed to prefer visibility over enclosure. Athena was honored through civic rituals, debates, and competitions rather than emotional prayer. Wisdom was shown through action more than words. Ritual purity mattered deeply. Certain acts temporarily excluded individuals from worship until cleansing occurred. Pollution was spiritual imbalance, not moral failure. Asclepius was worshipped through healing rituals that involved sleep and dreams. Dreams were believed to carry divine instruction when the mind was quiet. Festivals were both religious and political events. Honoring gods also reinforced shared identity. Music, theater, and sport were considered sacred activities. Dionysus was worshipped through controlled chaos, allowing release within strict boundaries. Excess was permitted only at specific times to prevent it from overwhelming daily life. Prayer was not personal confession, it was formal request. Mortals reminded gods of past offerings rather than pleading emotionally. Greek worship assumed gods were indifferent by default. Attention had to be earned, fear with a stronger motivator than love. Neglect offended gods more than disbelief. Religion was transactional, not devotional. Balance mattered more than belief. Rituals preserved order when emotions failed. Greek worship aimed to keep the world functioning, not to make it perfect. Greek mythology did not divide the world into good and evil. Most myths operated in a gray space where actions were judged by consequence rather than intention. The gods often punished success as much as failure. Standing out too much, even positively, could attract divine correction. Zeus was feared not because he was cruel, but because he was unpredictable. His punishments were inconsistent, reinforcing the idea that power did not need to be fair. Divine justice was reactive, not moral. The gods responded to imbalance, not wrongdoing in a modern sense. Tantalus was punished not only for his crimes, but for violating trust between mortals and gods. His eternal hunger and thirst symbolized desire without fulfillment, not physical pain alone. Sisyphus was punished for cleverness that crossed into defiance. His endless task represented intelligence stripped of purpose, not simply futility. The gods rarely forgave openly. Mercy existed, but it was quiet and conditional. Public forgiveness weakened authority. Hera often punished indirectly. Suffering was extended over time rather than delivered instantly. Long punishment was believed to teach balance more effectively than sudden destruction. Apollo frequently punished those who challenged his authority in art or knowledge. Excellence became dangerous when it suggested equality with a god. Marsyas was punished brutally for musical skill that rivaled Apollo's. The myth warned that talent required humility to survive. Athena punished arrogance more consistently than malice. Pride destabilized order more than cruelty. Transformation was one of the gods' preferred punishments. Changing form removed agency without destroying existence. Arachne was turned into a spider rather than killed. Her skill remained, but her status was permanently altered. Niobe was punished for boasting, not attacking. Her grief became a permanent landscape feature, merging emotion with geography. Greek myths often turned suffering into permanence. Pain became memory. Dionysus inspired both joy and madness. Loss of control was seen as divine invasion, not personal weakness. Madness was sometimes considered a form of knowledge. Seeing too much truth damaged the mind. Cassandra was cursed to speak truth without being believed. Her punishment was social isolation rather than silence. Silence was mercy. Awareness without influence was torment. Greek gods often tested limits rather than enforcing rules. Boundaries mattered more than laws. Many myths ended without resolution. Tragedy was allowed to remain unresolved. Hope was not guaranteed. Understanding was. Greek mythology accepted suffering as part of structure, not as error, not as injustice, but as consequence. Greek mythology includes many figures who were once widely known, but slowly faded as storytelling traditions changed. Their disappearance does not reflect insignificance, but shifting cultural focus. Phobos represented fear itself, not courage or conflict. He accompanied Ares into battle, embodying panic rather than strength. Fear was considered a weapon more powerful than violence. Causing panic could decide wars faster than killing. Deimos personified terror and dread. Together with Phobos, he represented the psychological collapse that preceded defeat. Greek myth treated emotional breakdown as divine influence, not personal failure. Iris served as a messenger between gods, similar to Hermes, but with a different function. She carried divine communication through natural phenomena, especially rainbows, symbolizing messages made visible rather than spoken. Eos represented dawn and renewal, yet her myths were filled with sorrow. Her repeated loss of mortal lovers showed that immortality did not protect against grief. Selene governed the moon independently of Artemis in early traditions. Later myths merged their roles, reflecting how gods were reinterpreted rather than replaced. Endymion was granted eternal sleep rather than immortality. Sleep preserved beauty without life, suggesting that stillness was sometimes preferable to change. Tyche embodied luck and chance, forces even wisdom could not control. Her worship increased during periods of instability. When planning failed, Kairos represented the perfect moment to act. Missing Kairos meant opportunity vanished permanently. Morpheus shaped dreams into recognizable forms. Dreams were considered messages requiring interpretation, not random images. Oneiroid delivered dreams of distant types, including prophecy and delusion. Not all dreams were truthful. Discernment mattered. Harmonia symbolized balance created through conflict. Harmony was not absence of tension, but controlled opposition. Cadmus sowed dragon's teeth that became armed warriors. Civilization emerged from violence, not peace. Bellerophon fell from favor after attempting to reach Olympus. Success tempted him to overreach, proving humility was required even after victory. Astraea left the world during the Age of Iron. Her departure symbolized the loss of innocence, rather than divine abandonment. Pan inspired sudden, irrational fear. The word panic originates from this influence. Echo lost her full voice as punishment. She could repeat words, but never initiate speech, representing loss of agency. Nemesis was often misunderstood as revenge. Her role was correction, restoring balance when excess threatened order. Hypnos was respected even by Zeus. Sleep could neutralize power without violence. Anteros represented love returned. Unreciprocated emotion was considered imbalance. Psyche achieved immortality through endurance rather than lineage. Her story emphasized patience over strength. Orpheus failed not because he lacked skill, but because he doubted. Trust mattered more than talent. Many forgotten figures governed moments, emotions, or transitions. Greek mythology treated small experiences as worthy of divine form. Loss of worship led to loss of story. Memory preserved divinity. Forgetting erased it. Greek myth survived because it adapted. What endured was meaning, not names. In Greek mythology, time was not simply a neutral background. It was an active force that shaped destiny, erased meaning, and revealed truth gradually, rather than instantly. The passage of time was treated with respect, not optimism. Chronos represented time as something that consumed all things equally. Gods, mortals, cities, and even memories were subject to his influence. Time was not evil, but it was unavoidable. Greek myths did not imagine time as something that could be controlled. Attempts to escape it usually resulted in deeper loss rather than freedom. Kronos was often confused with Kronos in later traditions, but his myth still reflected fear of time. By swallowing his children, he attempted to stop succession, aging, and replacement. Kronos' failure symbolized that time could not be paused. Preventing change only ensured more violent transformation later. Greek mythology treated memory as sacred. Remembering preserved identity, while forgetting dissolved it. Memory allowed mortals to remain human even after death. Mnemosyne was the mother of the Muses. This connection showed that art, history, and meaning depended entirely on remembrance. Without memory, creativity had no foundation. Forgetting erased culture before it erased individuals. Lethe flowed through the underworld, offering release from memory. Drinking from it removed pain, longing, and identity simultaneously. Forgetting was not portrayed as evil. It was portrayed as necessary for rest. Endless memory was considered unbearable. Souls who drank deeply from Lethe returned to the world without recollection. Rebirth required forgetting, not knowledge. In contrast, some souls were allowed to drink from the river Mnemosyne. These souls retained memory and achieved a higher form of understanding. Greek myths suggested that wisdom required memory, but peace required forgetting. The two could not fully coexist. Orpheus failed in the underworld because memory overcame restraint. His inability to forget fear caused him to turn back. Remembering too much at the wrong moment led to irreversible loss. Time in Greek myth often revealed truth slowly. Knowledge rarely arrived at the moment it was needed. Oedipus solved the riddle of the Sphinx, but failed to recognize his own history. Time exposed what intelligence alone could not. The tragedy was not ignorance, but delayed understanding. Greek mythology portrayed prophecy as memory of the future rather than prediction. Fate was remembered before it occurred. This made time circular rather than linear. Past, present, and future existed simultaneously in divine awareness. The Moirai did not foresee destiny. They maintained it. Their work was preservation, not invention. Cutting the thread of life ended memory as well as existence. Immortality in Greek myth was not freedom from time. It was exposure to it. Immortal beings experienced endless repetition and loss. Many gods envied mortals because mortals could forget through death. Tithonus was granted eternal life without eternal youth. Time continued, but renewal did not. His myth warned that survival without change was a curse. Greek heroes were remembered precisely because they did not escape time. Their deaths fixed their identities permanently. Living too long risked becoming irrelevant. Dying at the right moment preserved meaning. Memory also functioned as punishment. Eternal remembrance of failure was worse than physical torment. Sisyphus remembered his task endlessly. Forgetting would have been mercy. Repetition without progress represented time stripped of purpose. Greek mythology suggested that forgetting was not weakness. It was protection. Trauma without forgetting became madness. Cassandra remembered the future but could not change it. Knowledge without forgetting trapped her in isolation. Memory without influence became suffering. Time in Greek myth did not heal wounds. It revealed them. Healing required acceptance, not duration. The gods themselves relied on ritual and repetition to preserve memory. Festivals existed to prevent forgetting. Once worship ended, gods faded. Forgetting erased divinity. Memory sustained existence. Greek mythology treated time as the ultimate judge. Not gods, not fate. Time alone decided what endured. Civilizations collapsed when memory failed. Individuals survived when they remembered who they were. Yet even memory had limits. Too much remembrance froze the soul. Too much forgetting erased it. Balance remained the ideal. Between remembering and forgetting. Between past and future. Between loss and meaning. In Greek mythology, animals and objects were never simple decoration. They carried meaning, memory, and divine intention. A symbol was not metaphorical in the modern sense. It was functional capable of influencing fate, identity, and outcome. Animals were often extensions of divine will rather than independent creatures. When a god appeared through an animal, the animal did not disguise the god, it revealed a specific aspect of divine nature. Zeus was frequently associated with the eagle. The eagle symbolized authority from above, vision beyond human reach, and judgment delivered without warning. Lightning and the eagle worked together as symbols. One represented sudden power, the other constant surveillance. Athena was associated with the owl, an animal that sees in darkness. Wisdom in Greek myth was not clarity in daylight, but understanding in uncertainty. The owl symbolized observation rather than action. Seeing clearly mattered more than acting quickly. Apollo was linked to the raven, once white but turned black as punishment for delivering unwelcome truth. The myth suggested that truth carried consequence, even for messengers. Artemis was associated with deer, animals symbolizing vulnerability, protected by vigilance. Harming a sacred animal was equivalent to harming the goddess herself. Hera was linked to the peacock. Its many eyes represented watchfulness, jealousy, and memory of betrayal. Symbols often preserved emotional states long after events ended. Poseidon was associated with horses as much as the sea. Horses represented uncontrolled power, barely held in restraint. The invention of the horse symbolized force released into the world. Dionysus was linked to animals like panthers and bulls, creatures representing loss of control and instinct. Dionysian symbols warned against denying natural impulses entirely. Snakes appeared frequently in Greek myth. They symbolized renewal, hidden knowledge, and danger contained in silence. A snake's ability to shed its skin made it a symbol of transformation rather than rebirth. Asclepius carried a staff entwined with a serpent. Healing was seen as dangerous knowledge, requiring respect and restraint. Medicine and poison were closely related concepts. Sacred objects function as extensions of divine authority. Possessing them altered status immediately. Zeus wielded thunderbolts forged by the Cyclopes. These were not weapons of war, but tools of enforcement. Their use restored order rather than won battles. Athena carried the Aegis, a shield bearing the head of Medusa. The Aegis did not attack. It intimidated, freezing chaos before it began. Objects associated with Athena emphasized defense over aggression. Hermes carried the caduceus, a staff symbolizing balance between opposites. Its intertwined serpents represented negotiation rather than domination. Hades possessed the helm of invisibility. Invisibility symbolized authority exercised without presence. Power did not require display. Perseus used divine objects to defeat Medusa. Success depended on correct use rather than possession. The mirrored shield taught that indirect approaches prevented destruction. Sacred weapons punished misuse. Objects did not obey morality, only alignment. Heracles wielded a simple club rather than divine weaponry. Raw force symbolized endurance, not refinement. Animals also served as omens. Their behavior predicted divine response. Bird flight patterns were read as messages from the gods. Unusual animal behavior was treated as warning rather than curiosity. Sacred groves housed animals under divine protection. Killing within these spaces triggered severe consequence. Pan was associated with goats and wild spaces. Goats symbolized fertility chaos and unpredictability. Sacred objects were rarely destroyed. They were hidden, stolen, or sealed. Destruction erased memory. Preservation maintained power. Pandora carried a container often mistranslated as a box. Its contents were conditions, not creatures. Hope remained inside, not as comfort, but as endurance. Musical instruments were also sacred objects. Orpheus wielded a lyre capable of altering reality. Sound functioned as order imposed on chaos. When Orpheus lost control, music lost power. Symbols required discipline to function. Animals that crossed worlds held special meaning. Dogs guarded boundaries, birds crossed realms. Snakes moved between earth and underworld. These animals symbolized transition. Sacred objects could not override fate. They operated within it. Misusing symbols invited punishment. Ignoring symbols invited disaster. Greek mythology taught literacy of meaning. To survive, one had to read the world. Animals spoke without words. Objects carried memory. Symbols preserved order when reason failed. They were not decorations. They were instructions. Understanding them meant survival. Ignoring them meant collapse. Women in Greek mythology were rarely simple figures of good or evil. They operated within strict limits imposed by gods, fate, and society. Yet many exerted influence through intelligence, endurance, and control of circumstance rather than force. Female power in myth often appeared indirect. It moved through foresight, persuasion, memory, and patience rather than open dominance. Athena represented authority without marriage or motherhood. Her independence allowed her to act without divided loyalty, making her one of the most stable figures in the pantheon. Athena's restraint was not absence of power, it was its refinement. Hera is often portrayed as vindictive, yet her actions consistently defended order and legitimacy. Her punishments targeted disruption of lawful bonds rather than desire itself. Demeter demonstrated that grief could reshape the world. Her withdrawal caused famine, proving that refusal could be as powerful as action. Maternal sorrow became a cosmic force rather than private suffering. Persephone evolved from abducted maiden to sovereign queen. Her rule of the underworld symbolized maturity gained through experience rather than consent. Hecate existed at crossroads, thresholds, and boundaries. She represented female authority independent of male hierarchy and retained power under every divine regime. Aphrodite embodied desire as uncontrollable force. Love under her influence disrupted politics, families, and divine order, revealing attraction as destabilizing rather than comforting. Artemis defended autonomy fiercely. Her punishments reinforced boundaries, not cruelty, making consent and distance sacred principles. Medea was portrayed as both savior and destroyer. Her intelligence enabled heroic success, while betrayal stripped her of protection and transformed skill into vengeance. Penelope survived through patience rather than strength. Her weaving delayed collapse, proving endurance could outlast violence. Cassandra possessed truth without authority. Her tragedy lay not in madness, but in enforced disbelief. Helen was treated as cause rather than participant. Her lack of agency reflected how beauty was blamed for conflict it did not command. Ariadne enabled Theseus's victory and was then abandoned. Her knowledge mattered only until it was no longer needed. Circe transformed men into animals rather than killing them. Her magic exposed behavior rather than inventing it. Calypso offered immortality as isolation. Eternal life without choice was framed as imprisonment, not reward. Niobe was punished for pride expressed through motherhood. Her transformation into stone preserved grief as landscape. Psyche achieved immortality through endurance and obedience, rather than lineage. Her trials emphasized patience over power. Andromache survived war without victory. Her story preserved memory of loss rather than triumph. Antigone defied state law to honor moral duty. Her death questioned authority grounded solely in power. Gaia demonstrated female power as creation and correction. She overthrew her own offspring when balance demanded it. Rhea preserved the future through deception rather than force. Her silence saved Zeus. Leto endured persecution quietly. Survival itself became resistance. Echo lost her voice but retained presence. She represented identity stripped of agency. Sappho survived mythologically through voice rather than action. Memory preserved influence beyond narrative. Women in Greek mythology often lacked resolution. Their stories continued through consequence rather than closure. Silence, waiting, and refusal functioned as power, not weakness. Female figures preserved continuity when heroes destroyed it. They remembered what wars erased. They embodied cost, not conquest. Greek myth did not idealize women. It revealed the structures surrounding them. Agency appeared where restriction was tightest. Influence grew where force was denied. These figures endured not because they triumphed, but because they remained. Greek mythology does not end with answers. It ends with patterns. These patterns repeat across gods, heroes, monsters, and mortals, revealing how the ancient Greeks understood existence rather than how they explained it. One recurring pattern is balance. Every force in Greek myth has an opposite, and excess in any direction leads to correction rather than reward. Strength without restraint produces destruction. Wisdom without humility produces isolation. Love without limits produces chaos. Zeus represents authority constantly under threat. His reign survives not because he is perfect, but because threats are managed rather than eliminated. Power in Greek myth is maintained through adjustment, not certainty. Athena represents thought before action. Her endurance shows that foresight outlasts force. She does not win through dominance, but through relevance. Hades represents acceptance of limits. By ruling only what is his, he avoids rebellion. Contentment preserves authority more effectively than expansion. Another pattern is consequence. Factions always echo beyond intention. Outcomes matter more than motives. Greek myths rarely ask whether an action was justified. They ask what followed. Oedipus did not fail because he was immoral. He failed because knowledge arrived too late. Timing mattered more than intent. Memory and forgetting form another pattern. Remembering preserves identity. Forgetting preserves peace. Too much of either results in suffering. Orpheus lost everything because memory overpowered restraint. Love without discipline destroyed possibility. Greek mythology repeatedly shows that immortality is not escape, it is endurance. Gods suffer endlessly because they cannot forget. Mortals suffer briefly, but meaning crystallizes at death. This makes mortality valuable rather than tragic. Another recurring pattern is limitation. Every figure who attempts to exceed boundaries is corrected. Excellence attracts attention. Attention attracts consequence. Icarus is remembered not for disobedience, but for ignoring limits. The sun did not punish him, reality did. transformation appears frequently as correction. Rather than destroy, the gods alter form. This preserves existence while removing agency. Greek myths treat erasure as excessive. Change is preferred. Silence also functions as power. Many figures endure by waiting rather than acting. Patience preserves possibility. Penelope survives through delay, not confrontation. Her endurance outlasts war. Greek mythology also treats suffering as structural rather than accidental. Pain exists not as failure, but as signal. Ignoring suffering worsens imbalance. Acknowledging it restores proportion. Demeter reshapes the world through grief rather than violence. Refusal becomes force. Another pattern is that heroes do not fix systems, they expose them. After heroes leave, consequences remain. Heracles resolves problems temporarily, not permanently. Strength addresses symptoms, not structure. Greek mythology does not promise progress. It promises recurrence. History loops. Errors repeat. Wisdom lies in recognition, not optimism. The gods themselves are subject to these patterns. They do not escape them. Divinity does not mean freedom from consequence. It means longer exposure to it. Greek mythology survives because it does not comfort. It observes. It accepts contradiction without resolving it. Good and evil are not opposing camps. They are outcomes. Meaning arises from navigation, not victory. To live wisely in Greek myth is not to avoid suffering. It is to avoid excess. Restraint, awareness, and timing preserve continuity. This is why Greek myths endured beyond belief. They described structure, not faith. They mapped consequence, not morality. They explained why collapse happens and why balance matters. Greek mythology ends where it begins, with limitation, with awareness, with acceptance, not as surrender, but as understanding.